All right, Eric, we're ready to get going. Can you hear me, Eric?
I can hear you, Bill.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on QuerySurge, a smart data testing solution. I'm Bill Hayduk. I'm the CEO of RTTS. That's the parent company of QuerySurge. Eric Smyth, our Director of Alliances, is going to be kicking off the webinar with a presentation on QuerySurge's use cases, and he's going to follow it up with a demo of QuerySurge's key features. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into your chat window or the Q&A section down at the bottom. If you put them in the chat window, please make sure you address it to all panelists in the drop-down. We'll answer as many questions as we can after Eric's demo. Also, if you have any issues hearing, and I know somebody did, please post that in the chat also. So thanks again for your time and participation, and now I'm going to hand it over to Eric to kick it off. Eric, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bill. And just so everyone's aware, we are going to record this session, and the recording will be made available after the session has completed. So I would also like to thank everyone for joining. What I'd like to do today is provide you a brief overview of the QuerySurge application, its business case, its use cases, some of the benefits of our solution. And I will follow that up with a product demo where I will do a basic walkthrough, show you how to create tests, how to run those tests, how to analyze and view the results based on those executions. So with that, I'm going to get started. This QuerySurge launched in 2012. We have over 150 customers in 20 different countries. This is a sample customer list. We actually have a more extensive list on our website. Go to our customers, you can see them there. One of the things I like to point out on this slide is you can see that the customers really span across all different vertical markets. So whether your organization's in banking and finance or pharmaceuticals and healthcare, commerce, technology, all organizations are struggling with similar challenges. They're collecting large amounts of data from various different systems, and they're struggling with the ability to test and validate that this data is correct and accurate. So from a business case standpoint, we know that high-level executives are making critical business decisions based off of BI and analytic reports. And the assumption, of course, is that the underlying data in these reports is accurate. And due to the work that we've done with our customers and our partners, we know that's not always the case. Bad data can be introduced into the system, and it can affect the validity and accuracy of these reports that executives are making decisions on. So for example, you may have multiple different sources that are being ETL'd into a data warehouse. That could be ETL'd into one or more data marts that are feeding into those reports. There may be a data lake in the architecture. Simultaneously.
Eric, excuse me. Eric, could you speak a little louder?
Sure. Simultaneously, you could be running a data migration project as well. In addition, there may be multiple enterprise apps or ERP systems that are feeding into that system. So at any one of these points where data is moving between one piece of architecture to another, there's a possibility of bad data being introduced into the system. And that's where QuerySurge plays. It helps validate that data as it moves through the different points in your architecture. So QuerySurge is the smart testing solution for automated validation and testing of data. Our use cases are listed here. Data warehouse ETL testing has always been our sweet spot. A large percent of our customers are doing that type of work, verifying that multiple sources are being ETL'd into their data warehouse correctly. Big data is also a big space for us. Right around the time we launched was when the NoSQL data stores and Cloudera and Hayduk systems were really becoming prevalent. So we wanted to make sure that we could connect to those systems, test those systems as part of the overall architecture that you're working with. We have a very good DevOps continuous testing story. QuerySurge can essentially be integrated into any type of DevOps pipeline that you may have. I'll do an illustration of this in the demo that I'll be doing later. A hot topic of late is data migration testing. As organizations are going through their digital transformation and they're moving their data from maybe on-premise solutions into the cloud, or they're changing their architecture to modernize it, or maybe they're just doing an upgrade of the vendor's latest software QuerySurge can be used to validate that the migration process was done successfully. For BI report testing, we have an interesting solution where we have drivers that can get the data behind the underlying visualizations on the BI reports. And then you can take that data and compare it against any other source, such as other reports, other databases or data marts or files. And then enterprise app ERP testing for customers who have multiple feeds coming into their ERP system, and they want to be able to verify that those feeds are coming in correctly and accurately. QuerySurge has the capability to verify that as well. So the main concept of QuerySurge is we have a test which we call a query pair. And what that query pair does is it can test data from any 2 points at one time. So in the query pair, you'll define a source system, which could be a traditional database. It could be a mainframe, a flat file of various types, or web services. And then you'll also define your target system, which could be a data lake, a data warehouse, or a BI report. And what happens is at the time of execution, QuerySurge will make requests to both the source and target system. It will retrieve data sets from both, and it will do an analysis of all the data that comes back. It will check every single cell of every single record that has been requested. And it will look for any type of data anomalies, such as maybe records from the source system that didn't make it into the target system. Or maybe there was a transformation issue on some type of aggregate and the value is being displayed in the target system incorrectly. Or any other type of issue or bad data that may have been introduced in the process. And QuerySurge has the capability to take all the metrics gathered, roll them up into reports and dashboards so you can get insight onto where your problem areas are. We have automatic email triggers that will send notifications to any users once there are tests that do have failures so that they can investigate those failures and determine the best course of action. So if you look at your typical data architecture or data process, this obviously is overly simplified, but it's just meant to give you an illustration of how this would work. Typically, what happens as data is moving through your system is your ETL developers will be coding that transformation based off of some type of requirement or some type of mapping document, which tells them where the data is coming from, where it's going to, and what manipulation has to happen to that data as it moves into the new system. So from a QA perspective, people who are going to be using QuerySurge will be using that same information to design the tests necessary to validate that those processes are doing what they're supposed to do. You'll have tests that are testing different endpoints within the architecture, and after those jobs run, QuerySurge can run those tests associated with that job and pinpoint any issues. So one of the benefits, of course, is that you'll be able to locate exactly where the bad data was introduced into the architecture, hopefully pass that information along to the development team so they'll be able to resolve those issues quickly. Some of the benefits of the QuerySurge application, we have what we call our query wizards, which is a graphical user interface, which gives customers the ability to design tests for data migration project or what we call pass-through mappings very quickly. We polled the industry and found anywhere from 75 to 80% of all data fields would fall into this category. So with our query wizards, it's drag and drop functionality. You can just align the columns between the various source and target systems that you're testing and build these tests very quickly. This will be something that will be demonstrated in the product demo in a little bit. For your more sophisticated tests where you may be having to join information from multiple tables, you may have to do some type of calculation. We have our design library, which allows you to handle those types of more sophisticated tests using some of our features such as our snippets, which is parameterization of the queries. We have thresholding, which will allow you to pass or fail data sets if it falls within a range of values. We have a staging area for temporary storage if you have a multiple prong process and you need to be able to temporarily store that data in order to complete your overall process. QuerySurge was designed with speed in mind. Everything built into QuerySurge is to be grouped into suites for bulk execution, to be automated either on demand or to be scheduled at a later point. We've taken great pride in the performance of our solution and how it's able to test large quantities of data quickly. QuerySurge can test across a wide variety of different platforms. So whether you're using traditional databases for your data warehouse, whether you're using big data systems like Hadoop and NoSQL data stores, could be working off of mainframes or flat files or web services, QuerySurge can essentially connect to all of those and integrate that as part of your data testing platform. QuerySurge has a complete API, which allows you to do any task that a user typically does through the QuerySurge interface through API calls, both command line based and RESTful APIs, which integrate that into any type of DevOps or data ops pipeline that you may have. And we have a wide variety of data analytics and data intelligence reporting made available to you, custom user dashboards. And we also give you the ability to create any type of custom report you want by exposing our back both to queries and to BI tools, so you can create custom graphs and reports with any other type of external tool that you can connect to QuerySurge. A little bit about the QuerySurge environment. QuerySurge installs on its own server, has its own database and application server. Users typically are accessing QuerySurge through the browser. And QuerySurge also has a concept of agents. And what these agents are used for is to make the requests to the different data stores. Having multiple agents will allow you to run multiple sets of test suites in parallel to cut down your overall testing time. These agents will request the data from the various systems and then pass it along to the QuerySurge server for analysis. QuerySurge supports all your major browsers. The operating systems QuerySurge can be installed on are Windows and Red Hat Linux. And you can install QuerySurge either on a physical machine, it can be installed in a virtualized environment, or it supports all your various different cloud platforms such as AWS or Azure, Google Cloud, IBM Cloud, and some of the others. And QuerySurge is a Java application, which means it connects to all the various different technologies that you're going to be testing through JDBC. So what that means is as long as there's a JDBC compliant driver out there, you can use that as part of your overall QuerySurge testing effort. QuerySurge comes bundled with about 15 or so different drivers. Those are either drivers that we've developed internally, open source drivers, or drivers where we have a partnership with the vendor and they allow us to bundle it with our software. But for any of the others, you can simply go to that vendor's website, typically download the driver you need, place it on a QuerySurge agent, and then that can be used to set up a connection and be used for any of your QuerySurge tests. In addition, we've recently signed a partnership agreement with a company called CData. They are a producer of drivers, and all of their drivers are compatible with our application. So what that means is if there is a driver out there, or if there's a technology out there that you're having difficulty finding the driver for, if CData produces a driver for that, you can install that with QuerySurge and connect to those technologies. From a licensing perspective, QuerySurge is distributed per instance. An instance is comprised of the database, application server, and the agents. We have two types of licensing models: a perpetual license, which is a lifetime license. You purchase it and you own it forever. There is a maintenance plan that you can purchase annually, which allows you to stay on support, get the latest upgrades and bug fixes, and those types of items. We also have a subscription model, which is 12 months in term. So you can essentially rent QuerySurge for a year, utilize it, and at the end of that subscription, you have the option to renew it, or if the project's over and it's no longer needed, you can let that subscription expire. And then we have two license types: full users, which pretty much have full reign in the application. They can create tests, execute them, run analysis on everything that's generated. And we also have participant users. Think of them as read-only copies, where the user has the capability to view reports, view executions, but they can't actually build or run anything. That's typically used for stakeholders, project managers who wouldn't have that need. And all users are named users. They get associated to an account, but the QuerySurge administrator has the ability to move those licenses to new individuals if someone leaves the organization and a new person comes on. If you go through the QuerySurge modules, we'll walk through some of this during our demonstration. The Query Wizard helps you design those basic tests. Our design libraries where you can configure, make modifications, and create the more sophisticated tests needed. We have a scheduling area, which will allow you to group all of these tests together and schedule them for execution. We have a run dashboard, which will show you and monitor the groups of tests as they're running and can give you real-time insight as the results come back. You can then take those results and take that process and integrate it into your overall DevOps strategy. And then we have our intelligence reports and our dashboards that will roll up that information to give you visibility into what you need. And if you'd like to try QuerySurge out, we have several different trial license options. The first one listed here, trial in the cloud. Essentially, you just give us an email address. We'll send you a URL. We'll give you 3 days where you can test QuerySurge out. No installation needed. You can go through our tutorial and some of our basic training that's available online. If you'd like to connect QuerySurge to your data, you can download a 15-day trial. You can install it, and it's a full version of the product, limited to the 15-day duration. And then we also have POCs where you can get a 30-day license, get some of the add-ons available, and get access to our support. The QuerySurge support team is great. All of our support team members have been supporting and working with the product for several years, and they can pretty much assist you in any type of issue that you may encounter during any type of POC that you may be looking to execute. So in summary, QuerySurge helps to continuously detect data issues early in the pipeline. It dramatically increases your data validation coverage. What we tend to see is people who aren't using a product like QuerySurge are probably doing their data testing manually. They're testing a small fraction of their data, maybe 1 or 2%. And of course, that doesn't give most organizations the coverage that they would need to feel comfortable that their data is accurate. So with QuerySurge, we can test a large quantity of your overall data, helps improve your quality at speed, and provides a significant return on your investment. So with that, I am going to transition over into our product demonstration. If you have any questions, either during the demonstration or on anything that was just presented, please feel free to put them in the chat window. If we have time at the end of the session, we will look to go through some questions and address them if possible. If we don't have time to address all the questions, we will send follow-up emails and get answers to any questions that are put into the chat. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Everyone is able to see it. You'll see right now I'm on the login screen. As I mentioned, QuerySurge is a web application, so your users are typically going to access it through their browser. The first thing you'll see when you log in is your personal dashboard. So each individual user gets their own dashboard, which is able to display content that's relevant to them. We have a bunch of predefined widgets, which you can see on the right-hand side, that can be dragged and dropped and added to the dashboard for items that you want to track. In addition to that, you can also have multiple pages, so you can scroll through and keep multiple pages of widgets to kind of track all the information that's relevant to you. QuerySurge works very similar to a desktop application, so you'll see we have drag and drop functionality where you can move things around on the screen. We also have right-click menus, so you can right-click on various different items and you'll have actions that can be performed when using the product. Just want to drill into one of these dashboard reports to kind of give you some idea of the insights that QuerySurge can provide. So what we're looking at here is what we call our scenario outcome data reliability widget. And what this is doing is this is tracking the execution of a particular scenario, or I should say a particular test suite, and telling us how many verifications that are being tested, how many of them are passing, and how many of them are failing. So you can see in this particular example, we're tracking this suite called shipping. This suite is validating about 160,000 verifications. And you can see multiple times I've executed it. We have about 130,000 that are passing, about 33,000 that are failing, which gives you a data reliability score of about 80%. So that's saying your data is about 80% accurate. That's not very good. That's a lot of bad data, but it's intentional because in this particular example, we want to show some of the issues that can occur and be able to give you insight into that. But of course, you could monitor these executions over time, whether they're nightly or periodically, and then you can check to see if you're getting more failures than usual, if that blue line comes down and your data is less accurate, and that would be something you'd want to monitor and check in on. So with that, I'm going to transition over to our design library. So if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see we have a root folder for our query pairs. Again, as a reminder, a query pair is our concept of a test. If you expand that folder, you can see a customized folder structure that you can organize and manage however you like. I'm going to drill into this one particular folder, and what you'll see are a list of query pairs here. In addition to having the query pair name and its modified date, you'll also see it has an icon indicating whether that query pair was successful the last time it was executed or it ran into any type of issue. I'm going to open up a particular query pair so you can see the details. And what you'll see is we have two sections. We have a source side on the left and then a target side on the right. And you'll see both the source and target have a connection drop-down menu. And the connection drop-down menu tells you which data store that either the source or target is going to be making the request to. Now I'm going to click on this drop-down so you can see the extensive list here. Now this is a pretty large list because this is a demo environment. But what you'll see are all the various different types of technologies that QuerySurge can access, whether it's AWS Redshift, whether it's testing flat files like CSVs or Excel, whether you're testing big data stores like Hive tables or HD Insights, whether you're testing BI tools like MicroStrategy or Cognos, traditional databases such as Oracle or SQL Server, SAP HANA. You can see QuerySurge can support all of these. Each one of these connections gets set up in the administration area, and then it just becomes available to be selected when you create any type of test. And of course, what you'll see here are the queries that are going to execute against our source and target systems. So in this example, we're connecting to an Oracle sales database on our source side, and on our target side, we're connecting to an Oracle data warehouse. Now, one other important thing to note here is the syntax that's used to make the data request will support any native commands to the technology that you're connecting to. So in this case, because we're connecting to Oracle, it has the capability of running any type of Oracle function, any type of Oracle stored proc. You could execute, create and insert commands prior to requesting the data, all within this interface. In addition, if you have disparaging technology, so for instance, if I had an Oracle database as my source or a DB2 database as my target, I could use Oracle specific functions in my source query and DB2 specific functions in my target query. And these queries can be designed either manually or they can be designed using our query wizard, which I will demonstrate in a moment. Before I do that, what I'd like to do is show you the results of an execution. So if we went and ran this test, what would happen is QuerySurge would run the queries against both source and target systems, and it would give you the following result. It would tell you the overall status of the query pair. In this case, you'll see this one failed. It will display how many records came from our source system and how many records came from our target system. So you see roughly 6,500 records. That number is the same, which is a good sign, which means we have a 0 row count difference between our source and target. But we have 7 records that had some type of data failure. So there was a mismatch between our source and target system. Out of the 6,500 records tested, only 7 had that failure. If you look below, we have some basic performance metrics. It'll tell you how long it took to run a source query, how long it took to run the target query, and then how long it took QuerySurge to do the analysis. So if you look at the bar here, in order to test these 6,500 records, it took a little under 4 seconds for that to complete. Now, if we want to get a deeper dive to say, well, what exactly went wrong with our data here, we can click this View Query Results button. And what that will do is open up a modal window, and it will show you all the data that came from your source system in this Source tab. If I I move over to the target tab, it'll show me all the data that came from my target system. But of course, we have 6,500 records here, so we have a lot of data to look at. What we really want to know is, well, what failed? What were the differences between my source and target data? And if I look at it in this side-by-side view, if you remember from the previous screen, we said that there were 7 records that had some type of data failure. These are those 7 records. On the left side, you'll see the records from the source, and on the right side, you'll see the records from the target. And if you scroll over, you'll see that QuerySurge will highlight the specific fields where the data mismatch occurred. Again, out of those 6,500 records, for whatever reason, these 7 were not transformed properly when it was converted into our target system. So of course, this is something you'd probably want to bring to your developers' attention. So QuerySurge has the ability to export this data out, either in Excel, CSV, or XML format. Or you can hit the Export All button, in which case it'll take each one of these tabs and create a worksheet inside of an Excel workbook, which then, of course, you'll have that document and be able to distribute. You'll also notice that in this particular example, all of these were data failures, which means we had a mismatch between our source and target, which is why it's indicated by a red flag. The other type of issue that QuerySurge can capture is a non-matching row. So you may run into a scenario where there were records either in the source or target system that didn't exist in its counterpart. So you want to have those flagged as well. So just to show you an example of that briefly, I'm going to go back to my File Explorer and bring up another test. And if we look at the results, you'll see in this case, we had a little under 5,000 records from our source system, but we had 4 more records that were displayed in my target. So there were 4 additional records in the target that didn't exist in the source, which is why we have a row count difference of 4, which is also considered a failure. And if we do an analysis of the results and we go to that same failures tab and look at the side-by-side view in the failure window, what you'll see is the 4 records in the target system that didn't have a corresponding match to the records in our source system. This could happen for a wide variety of different reasons. Maybe these records were duplicated for some reason. Maybe they were improperly put into this table and they shouldn't have been. This is something else that QuerySurge can test, can catch, and of course you can report on that to your development. The next thing I'd like to illustrate is to show you how you can design and build these query pairs quickly with our Query Wizard. Go to our top menu. You'll see we have the ability to launch our Query Wizard. Again, this is a graphical component, which will give you a step-by-step process on how to create some of these query pairs quickly. So the first thing it's going to ask you to do in the wizard is to select your source and target systems that you want to test. So I'm going to use my same example, selecting my Oracle Sales database as my source and my Oracle Data Warehouse as my target. You'll see QuerySurge will do a quick metadata check to verify that the connection can be established and return some basic metadata. Next, I'll have the option to choose what type of comparison I want to perform. I can do a quick sanity test using a row count comparison. Just tell me if the source and target systems have the same number of records. I can do a table level comparison, which will compare every single cell within the table. This is great for data migration projects. Or I can be more granular and specify specifically which columns in my source system I want to compare to which columns in my target system. That tends to be the most interesting, so that's the one I'm going to demonstrate for you here today. The next thing it's going to ask for is for you to specify the schema or the database from your source and target systems that you want to test. So I'll go ahead and make that selection on both my source and target side. And then what it's going to show me, I'm going to maximize this window so you can get better visibility into it, are all the different tables in both my source and target system. So what you would do at this point is you'd kind of refer to your requirements or your mapping document so that you can determine, well, which tables align with each other and which ones should be tested. So for instance, in my example, I know based off of my requirements that there's an orders table from my source system, and that corresponds to a table called purchase in my target system. So I'm just going to use some basic filtering here so I can easily see which tables I'm dealing with. And then if I want to establish a query pair between those two tables, I simply drag a line between my orders table on the source side to my purchase table on the target side. And that will do one of three things. One, it will create a new query pair to be added to the folder structure that you saw earlier. Two, it will show me all the individual columns from your source and target systems. And three, you'll be able to see the source query and the target queries that are being created. Now, because I didn't specify any columns at this point, what it's showing me is it's just doing a select star. It's bringing back all the information from those tables. So what I want to do next is I want to specify which columns I need to test. So I know based off my requirements, the ID order column aligns with the ID purchase column. And I know that the order date aligns with the purchase date. And you'll see as I drag and drop these, it's modifying the query for me. The ship date will align with the delivery date. I'll do one more. And you would do that for all the columns that need to be tested. If you need to apply some basic filtering or sorting to the queries that you're generating, we have that ability in the bottom of the wizard. You'll see we can add a new sort or filter criteria. You specify whether the filter is going to be applied to the source or target system. You specify the column. So in this particular example, what I'm going to illustrate is I only want records that have been executed since the beginning of the month. So I'm going to say from my source side, only give me records where the order date is after, we'll select April 1st. So you see we got a nice little calendar object there. And once I add that filter, it will put the clause in the source query needed to filter out the data that I want in this particular test. And I can do the same thing to the target and add sorting or as many additional filters or sorts that I need. Once I've comfortable with the test that I've designed, if I'm ready to create a new one, I can simply drag in a line between two new tables. You'll see added a new item in my query mapping, added more columns. I can go ahead and drag and drop, and it will go ahead and build those queries and build as many of those query pairs as needed. And then once I'm finished building all of my query pairs, I have the option to create them or add them to a new folder or an existing folder. I then have the ability to group them all together into a test suite that's going to be used for execution purposes. So at this point, what I'd like to show is to go into those test suites and show you how you can organize your query pairs from an execution standpoint. So going over to the next module, you'll see that we have a scheduling area. If I go into that scheduling, you'll see all the different query pairs that have been created in my environment. I can create sorry, not query pairs, these are suites, a collection of query pairs that are going to be used for execution. I have the ability to create a new suite if needed, or I can modify existing suites. So for example, if I open up one of these suites, you'll see this one has 9 query pairs included in it. If I want to add additional tests or query pairs to run as part of the suite, you'll see I have the query pair library on the right-hand side. I can simply expand this folder list, go to an individual query pair that I want to add to this execution, and drag and drop it into that folder. You'll see it got added to the top. Or I could take the entire folder and drag that into the suite, and it'll add all the individual query pairs from that folder to be included as part of this execution. If I want to exclude some of these from that run, I can just go ahead and remove them from the suite. Of course, if I want to save those changes, I can just save them here. In this particular case, I don't want to save anything I did there, so I'm just going to have it not save the changes I made. So now when you're ready to execute your suite, you can do this one of 3 ways. You have the ability to execute it on demand. You can just hit run now, and QuerySurge will go ahead and launch those individual query pairs, execute them, and start bringing you the results back. You also have the ability to schedule a scenario. And what a scenario is, it gives you the ability to execute multiple suites, which contain multiple query pairs based on a specific date and time. So let's say I want to run a bunch of these over the weekend. I'm going to call this weekend run. I'm going to choose the date I want to run them. So I'm going to run them on Saturday. And then I specify which suites I want to execute. So maybe I want to run my demo suite. In addition, I want to run my smoke test. And again, these are suites which contain multiple query pairs. So each one of these suites could have hundreds or thousands of tests that it's running. And then you could choose to run all of them at the same time. So if you have multiple agents and you want to run these tests in parallel, you can either say run it on the first available agent, or you can specify a specific agent that you want to run it on. Or you can stagger the time. So maybe I want to run this suite a little bit later in the day. I can choose to stagger the execution time and organize and run these anytime you want. And then the third option we have from an execution standpoint is we can do an event-based driven execution externally from QuerySurge. And for those of you who are looking to set up your DevOps or DataOps pipeline, this is probably going to be the option of choice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into a Jenkins build application. For those of you who may not be aware, Jenkins is an open source build tool, which many organizations use to kind of structure their build process around. And I have this particular job called shipping tables ETL. And what this job is going to do is this is going to simulate an ETL process. And once that process is complete, it's going to fire off the necessary QuerySurge tests to validate that process. So what you'll see is it just completed this ETL job. It ran pretty quickly. And at this point, it's now making the request to QuerySurge to say, run the tests associated with this job. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to toggle over into QuerySurge, and I'm going to show you our run dashboard. So this is where in QuerySurge you can monitor active executions. So if you could see, this icon is orange in the upper left-hand corner. We're monitoring this shipping suite that's being executed that was triggered from Jenkins. You'll see it has a date and timestamp. It was just initiated. And you'll see that it was tracking the information on the graph down below. So this suite obviously ran very quickly, but you could have suites that are taking 15, 20 minutes to run, depending on the size of the data set you're executing. It's good to be able to monitor at which phase these different tests are in, how many of them have been completed, how many of them are currently being analyzed, so you can really track those metrics. You'll see in this particular example, we ran 5 query pairs as part of our suite. You'll see the overall summary statistics on the right-hand side. Out of those 5, only 1 passed, and 4 of them had failures. So, of course, if I want to drill in and see the details of those failures, I can double-click on the suite that was run as part of the scenario. You see the individual query pairs. And if I click on one of these, you'll see the exact same information that you saw when we showed you the run from the design time. You'll see the source data, the target data, as well as the failures. And you can see in this case, the failure we ran into is there was a problem with the calculation on the shipping cost where the amount is incorrect between my source and target systems. And you can see this has been consistent. This happened for every single record that we tested. In this example, we tested 11,000 records, and every single one of them had this failure. One other thing to note is you can view these even if there's more query pairs still executing. So even if the suite hasn't finished, you can open up this window and get into the details to kind of see what's going on, even if you have other tests that are still running. Now, if I toggle quickly back over our Jenkins build, you'll see that that status of the execution of this scenario was returned to Jenkins. So what that allows you to do is you can put in some conditional logic into your DevOps pipeline to say, well, if something failed, maybe you want to execute a rollback procedure. If it passed, maybe you go to the next phase or the next job that needs to be executed. So QuerySurge gives you that capability because not only can you drive the execution, you also get the status returned and can handle that and use it however needed. In addition, if I go into my email and refresh, you'll see we had an email notification that came in that told us that there was a failure in this shipping scenario. And if I open up that email, you'll see lots of good metrics that are returned. One, you see the overall number of query pairs that were executed, how many passed, how many failed, which gives you a 20% pass rate. So of course that information is important. But we also tell you how many verifications were done. So we ran 165,000 verifications. A verification is a validation of a specific cell for a particular record. And you can see out of all those verifications, we had 33,000 failures, which is why our data reliability score is 80%, meaning that 80% of our data was accurate. So both of those numbers are important. Not only do you want to know how many tests failed, but you also want to know how accurate your data is. Below that, you'll see metrics for the individual suites, as well as the individual query pairs that were executed, their individual status, as well as how many rows were tested and how many data failures each one of those tests encountered. These emails also have drill down capabilities. I'm not going to do it here, but if I click on one of these links, what would happen is it would open up a new tab, ask me to log into QuerySurge, and it would take me right to that specific test that we were analyzing before, and then be able to, of course, look at the failures and export those failures out if needed. You see the same export options that we had earlier. So in conclusion, the last thing we want to take a look at is what type of reporting is available. So if you go into our data analytic reports, you'll see our reports are organized either by designing the tests, the scheduling, or the execution scenarios. The one I'm going to bring up here is our scenario detail report, which is very similar to what you just saw in the email that was issued. You'll see this is the scenario I just ran. I'll hit run report, and you'll see the same details that you saw in that email, but a little bit more colorful as the reporter gives us more capabilities from a visual perspective. These reports have the ability to be saved as PDF or exported if it has tabular data into Excel. Some of the other really useful reports that are available, you'll see we have a scenario comparison. So if I ran a report, or I said if I ran a suite last week and I ran it this week and I want to see what the differences were, I could run that scenario comparison report and it will highlight any of the different results between the two. We have query timing. So if you're looking for performance numbers and want to see how long the queries ran today versus yesterday, you can get that. We have some root cause analysis reports, really helpful. What that will give you insight into is whether your which tables or which columns within those tables tend to be the ones that are most problematic over your larger swath of testing. Again, if we don't have a report that you're looking for, we do give you the capability to access the metrics that we're calculating, to either run your own queries and dump that results into an Excel sheet for some type of pivot table, or you could point your own BI tool at our back end and create any type of custom report that you want. So I hope that demonstration gives you a high-level overview of how it works, how to build tests, how to execute tests, how to analyze results. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. I know there was a few questions in the chat. So Bill, if you want to.
Oh, there's a lot of questions, Eric. Thanks for the presentation. What I want to do is I want to introduce Matt Moss, who's the QuerySurge product manager, to assist with answering the questions, because unlike Eric, Matt got a chance to read all the questions before and formulate answers in his head. So before Matt, can you hear us?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. So before we start asking questions, I want to answer one of the questions that came in, and I think everybody saw it in the chat. Can we get a recording of this session? Yes, this session is being recorded, and it'll be posted to our website, and everyone that attended will get an email from us with a link, so everyone will have access to it. All right, so here we go. How much time does it take to compare data for 10 million records?
So that's a fantastic question. So in terms of testing 10 million records, it does depend upon a few factors with QuerySurge. One factor is going to be the speed of your source and your target systems, as well as the hardware that's dedicated for QuerySurge. Very often people will test 10 million records and maybe have one column, which will be a lot faster than testing, say, 10 million records that have, say, 100 columns. Our internal testing that we've done with our small performance machine, that type of test with about 5 columns took approximately 13 minutes. And we've seen customers that run, say, 1 billion records through their systems in under an hour. So it really depends upon what the size of data that you're testing is and the speed of your QuerySurge instance. But in most cases, you can run through 10 million records very, very quickly.
Great. Is there parallel execution of query pairs?
Yes, that's another great question. So one of the things that Eric mentioned is this concept of agents. And what agents are remote machines that actually execute your query pairs. And you can have multiple agents configured in your instance. As you can see here, we have one agent that's currently online, and we have a second agent that is offline. By default, you can spin up to 10 agents, but there's really no limitation on the number of agents that you can set up. We just like to get involved once you go beyond 10. And each agent has multiple threads. So it's not like they're just running one test at a time. By default, we actually configure them for 3 threads. So they'll actually be running 3 tests parallel.
You knocked off 2 questions with 1 answer. Next question, if data are from different data sources, like one from Oracle and the other from SQL Server, and in different databases, what's the approach the QuerySurge takes?
So QuerySurge treats all of the data sources pretty much in the same manner. What you would do is write your SQL against your particular data source, whether it's Oracle or SQL Server. You can write anything that is compliant for that database. So if you're in Oracle, you can write all of the functions that you're normally used to in Oracle. And on SQL Server, you can run everything that is standard for SQL Server. The only thing that you need to be aware of when it comes to QuerySurge and its interaction with those particular databases is that the order of your columns needs to be the same. As you can see in here, we have our customer ID on the left as our first column and our customer ID on the right as our first column. They don't have to have the same name, but those are the 2 columns that we're comparing to each other. So as long as they're in the same order, you can write anything that's compliant with that database, and it really allows a lot of flexibility. As Eric was just showing the dropdowns, you can really connect any 2 data sources, whether it's SQL Server and Oracle, whether it's a flat file to, say, Azure Data Warehouse.
Matt, what if you wanted to combine Oracle and SQL Server data as a source and compare it to a target like Teradata?
You can do that as well. One of the things that we often have questions on is I have multi-stage jobs where I'm combining data from 2 databases and then eventually comparing it to a third. In that particular case, that's where our data staging comes into play. What that does is allows you to pull data directly into QuerySurge. You can do that from all of the sources that you can connect to with a query pair. So that means flat files, databases, data warehouses, and data marts. And then once you have them in our database, they're essentially a unified source, and you can join them together. What you see here, what Eric is showing, is it's creating a table inside of QuerySurge that you can use in your test called quantity by city. So you can do that with every database that you have or flat files. Pull it right in and join them together.
Great. Next question. I have some mainframe jobs running in a scheduler. I have to compare the output file where the data position is variable and changes dynamically with the data loaded in DB2 tables against each field. Is this possible?
So that's a fairly difficult one. In terms of testing mainframes, we have a number of customers that actually test the files that come out of mainframes, whether they're in acidic or other formats. In terms of variability of the structure of your data itself, you will need to provide some type of mapping logic for that structure. So it may require you to do automatic updates. More than likely, you have probably some code in place that handles this for the ETL process, and you can reuse that for QuerySurge. One of the great things about QuerySurge is we have a really robust API. So if you need to programmatically update your tests on the fly for any reasons, whether it's to change a connection, whether it's to alter, say, a structure of a test, you should be able to do that automatically. But it will require some knowledge of how that variability is implemented.
Great. This is a 3-part question. Well, I think the first part can be answered by showing them where to find the information. Can you please provide more details about the deployment architecture of the application?
So QuerySurge has 3 main components, and that is the application server, the database server, and the agent. You can install all 3 components on a single machine. We support both Windows, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and Fedora Core, and we're looking to support CentOS as well. You can split those components onto 3 separate machines as well. As I was mentioning earlier, we support multiple agents. At minimum, you'll have to have 1 agent because that's going to be running your tests, but you can spin up as many agents as required. The thing about agents are they are 1 per machine, so you would have to spin up a machine for each one of those agents. Overall, QuerySurge itself is a pretty small component. Our requirements are about 32 gigs of RAM, which is far smaller than most production data warehouses and data marts that are out there, so you don't have to worry about acquiring terabytes of RAM or anything like that, but the more memory, CPU, and disk you provide, the faster QuerySurge will run. We do recommend using an SSD, so that's another component that I would recommend, just because we store all of your results internally, and that's for auditing-based purposes. So an SSD provides a lot of performance boost just because it's able to write a lot quicker.
Right, and if you go to our knowledge base real quick, Eric, you could see the architectures listed in detail up there. It's probably a good time to show the knowledge base. It's right on our website. It's public information to anybody that wants to see anything about QuerySurge. And while Eric's showing you that, I'll go on to the next part of the question. What are best practices for where and how to deploy agents? Here's our knowledge base. Eric's showing that now.
So our recommendation for agents are that they're installed on much smaller machines. We're talking 2 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, and only maybe 20 gigs of space, just because it needs space for the OS. We don't have any preference of physical machines versus virtual machines or cloud hosted. It's up to you and whatever's best for your organization. The one thing I would suggest and our recommendation is that these are physical machines that are dedicated to QuerySurge, because you don't want to have these on, say, a local tester's machine or on a laptop that may be disconnected if someone restarts the system or closes down these particular processes. And what Eric's showing you here is our standard architecture. In this case, this is a 3-tiered architecture where we have a database on a separate machine on the left, the application server where everyone's going to be accessing through the web and the like, and then our agents. And you can see our agents are the component that's actually going to be communicating with all of your different data sources.
Do we get assistance in setting up QuerySurge and connectivity help in a POC session? Or is it only available for when you buy licenses?
That's a great question. We 100% support POCs. So we have a POC form on our QuerySurge website. If you fill that out, we can set up a POC setup for you, which is a 30-day instance of QuerySurge. It's a full-fledged instance of QuerySurge, so you can test anything that you want with it. It has all of the capabilities and functionality. We actually set up weekly sessions, if you'd like, to discuss any issues or items that you might have. And that POC comes with full technical support. So if you have any questions on setting up connections, configuring specific environments, or even just deploying QuerySurge in general, we'd be happy to assist you with that.
And that's where you get access to all of our add-ons like the QuerySurge for DevOps and Ready for Analytics and Import-Export and everything else in the POC session.
Exactly. And pretty much any questions open in those POCs. So if you have anything specific, we're more than happy to help.
Can this connect easily with Microsoft Azure Cloud and compare millions of records between 2 databases based on multiple filter criteria and requirements?
Yep. So in terms of the Azure Cloud, we connect to pretty much all of the main Azure data warehouses and data platforms. So Azure SQL Server is absolutely no issues. In fact, it uses the same driver that you would use to connect to a local instance of SQL Server. So it's very easy to set up. As with anything, when you're dealing with the cloud, you might have some latency just pulling that data back and forth. So just be aware of where you put your QuerySurge instance. But we have absolutely no problem connecting to those. We have customers that are connecting to the Oracle Cloud, the IBM Cloud, Microsoft's Cloud, and Azure, or AWS, I mean. So you should have absolutely no issues connecting in.
Right, and I just want to.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention that we are Microsoft partners, and Microsoft recommends us as the data validation tool of choice on their migration page. Next question, if there is logic change, will it end up changing the query also? Might not be in all cases, but in a couple of cases, is my understanding correct?
So if you have underlying business changes to your ETL process, you will need to update your query pairs to reflect those, because now you've changed the testing process. So it is an ongoing effort when you're having new requirements coming into your system that you'll need to do updates to your query pairs. Now, this could be a manual effort where you go in and make any updates, such as changing how a concatenation works or adding a new group by into a particular situation. Or you can automate this if possible with our API, which allows you to change your query pairs on the fly. If for some reason you have a requirement that changes so quickly that you can't really keep up with it, you can always use, say, a high-level business rule to tell if, say, a value is null, if it's within a certain range, or any type of logic that might be relevant for your particular data set. But our normal recommendation is to go in and make any tweaks that are required, as you should have hard-coded rules to validate your data.
Great. I have tested by converting a delimited file to Excel, but have trouble with CSV file. Can you explain how to validate through CSV files?
That's a great question as well. So one of the great things about QuerySurge, we treat every data source, whether it's Oracle or Excel or even a CSV, as almost like a database. So you can just write SQL against your CSV or your Excel file. Select stars, group bys, you can join flat files together. So the great thing about QuerySurge is you only need one skill set and it's really easy to test your data. So in the case of testing CSVs to Excel, you'll actually be able to pull all of the data in, specify the particular sheet or the particular range in Excel that you want to test, and actually in the CSV itself, write a query against it. In this particular case, you can see on the left-hand side, we're doing a very simple select versus an actual CSV file. And all we're doing is specifying the columns that we want to pull data out of. If you don't have column headers, you can provide them as part of your connection and just say that column 1 is actually called our order number. As I mentioned, you can do anything that's really in standard ANSI SQL. So you can concatenate columns together, you can do aggregates, you can do casting, anything that you might want to do if it was, say, a normal database.
Great. Is the email option, which was shown in the deck, available in the 15-day trial version?
Yep. All of the email functionality and almost all of the core functionality in QuerySurge is active and available. In the administration section of QuerySurge, you can configure your email settings. So it just requires a couple of pieces of information. And then you'll see, as Eric is showing you right now, once you have this configured out, you can use the test email and you can set up any notifications you want by using the all notifications option on the left-hand side. So we have a bunch of email notifications that you can configure, whether it's to trigger on a test that fails, whether it's to tell you if you're running out of space on your QuerySurge instance, or to let you know if, say, a particular scenario has started. All of these are completely customizable, so you can go in and make tweaks and have them get triggered by different events.
How would the agent come into the picture when we have only one single query for source and target system?
So when you run a test in QuerySurge, every single query pair is sent to an agent. None of the tests are going to be run on the application server specifically. So if you run one query pair, QuerySurge is going to go see if you have any available agents up and running. It will allocate that query pair to one of your agents, and that agent's actually going to break your query pair up into two threads, one for your source query and one for your target query. This allows you to run them not only in parallel, it allows you to run multiple query pairs at the same time. So if you had to run 10 query pairs, it will actually delineate them out to different agents, and if they have available threads, they'll actually execute that particular threaded query pair.
Can the results of a query pair be stored to a table for auditing purposes?
So all results in QuerySurge are stored in our database indefinitely. So they are on-prem in your QuerySurge instance as long as you want to keep them. We have data retention policies, so you can purge them out every day, every month, every week. It's up to you to choose how long you want to keep your results. The great thing about our storage of results is you can always go back to a previous run. So as Eric kicked off a run in our scenario dashboard that you saw, you can go back to any of your previous runs and see the results that came out of that. Additionally, we have this concept called Ready for Analytics, which exposes our database as a whole. And you can go directly to those tables if you want to use them to write an audit report or something of that nature. And as you can see here, as Eric clicks around, you can go to any previous result that you've executed in QuerySurge, as long as you have your data retention policy keeping those. And that's detailed results all the way down to any of the failures that might have occurred.
What's the volume of test data supported by QuerySurge? Is there any upper limit?
So we don't have a theoretical upper limit. It's really just based off of the amount of time that you're willing to allow the test to run. and the amount of space and hardware available to QuerySurge. As you grow in the size of your tests, that's where you're going to need to have additional storage space available for QuerySurge to store those results and to perform the comparison. So we don't have a theoretical upper limit. We've done tests in the billions of records and have absolutely no issue locally. So it really just depends upon the hardware you allocate to QuerySurge and the time you're willing to have that test run for.
How can we take a backup of all query pairs that we build under the QuerySurge design section?
There is probably 3 ways to do a backup in QuerySurge. The first way is you can right-click any folder in QuerySurge, and we have this concept called import export, and this is an add-on feature in QuerySurge. What this allows you to do is export all of the query pairs, staging queries, or snippets under a particular folder, and that comes out as an Excel file which you can re-import in, or just store it as a backup for any type of purposes. You can do a complete backup of your QuerySurge database at any point. It just requires copying a single directory when the QuerySurge database is down. And we actually recommend you do backups, on a fairly regular basis. Those backups can be restored at any point, and it's a very easy process to do. So if you do have, say, an issue where, say, the entire machine was deleted by accident, if you have one of those backups, we'd be happy to restore it with you. And that would include not just your query pairs, but all of your results that were stored at that point in time, your users, and all of the assets in QuerySurge. Lastly, we have our API, and you can programmatically call through our API and pull out that data as well. So if you needed to do this instead of having maybe import-export, you can do that through our API as well.
Yeah, the base product contains execution API, but we have a whole DevOps, QuerySurge for DevOps functionality that has about 60 different functions, allows you to do anything you want in QuerySurge. How can we configure email alerts to get test suite run results from the scenario detail report?
So as Eric was showing just before, inside of the administration section is where you'll be able to configure any of the automatic email triggers. You can have that set up to trigger based off of the outcome of a particular test. We only allow for high-level details to be emailed out automatically. So you can see here as Eric opens up the do not pass report, you can configure this particular item to have any email body you want. By clicking the green button in the body, you'll actually see all of the variables you can put in here. So we have the detailed results at the bottom. You can put in things like pass rate, the owner, and so forth. We don't put in all of the data from a result, such as the query pairs that passed versus failed, or allow triggering of, say, the reports in the reporting section, just because they can be fairly large. We don't want to overload anyone's email system. Results at a raw level can be pulled through our DevOps API, as Bill was mentioning, and that would allow you to programmatically pull that information. Our API does limit you based off of the number of rows to pull at a time, so you can only pull 100 rows at a time, and that's just because it could be a huge amount of data that you're passing over the network. We don't want to overload anyone's systems.
Do the recipients need to have an account in QuerySurge to view the individual test results, or can they be seen on a browser with a read-only view?
So you do need an account inside of QuerySurge, but we have this concept called participant users. And a participant user is a read-only user in QuerySurge that is a low-cost solution to have someone get access to the tool. Rather than have them be able to kick off test runs or make any manipulations, they'll be able to view the query pairs, see the results of those runs, and just browse around. So it's a nice option for it. But in terms of allowing anyone just carte blanche access to QuerySurge, we don't allow that just from a security perspective. You'll need to add everyone manually into the system, which is a pretty easy process overall.
Can you point us to the documentation on the performance benchmark of QuerySurge?
Sure, we can definitely include that to anyone that requests that information. We do have this performance information that we've run on a fairly regular basis. And if anyone would like that documentation, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to have that. Bill, do we currently host that?
No, I think it's on if someone sends us an email, we send it to them.
So it's a fairly long document. I believe it's about 50 or 60 pages that describe some of our testing efforts that we do on an annual basis with QuerySurge. to determine its performance capabilities of a bunch of different functionality, not just running query pairs, but how many concurrent users will use the system.
Does QuerySurge support vSAM files?
We do. In most cases, when you're dealing with any of these mainframe type files, you will need to convert them into a format that is readable by QuerySurge. So we do have documentation, and we have customers that are testing vSAM. However, they will need conversion. In most cases, those conversions already exist as they're pulling those vSAMs and loading those files into other databases. And usually that can be piggybacked on with QuerySurge.
How do we schedule test suite runs in Jenkins recursively?
So that's an interesting question. In terms of recursively scheduling it, you would need to use our API to read the results back to determine where you would like to change your tests. In terms of scheduling with Jenkins, that's using our execution API, and it's very straightforward. We actually have a knowledge base article that describes the process of setting up a Jenkins jobs with QuerySurge, and it's probably something that can be done in under an hour if you have experience with Jenkins. For more advanced items, that's where our DevOps API would come into play, and you can actually use our DevOps API to manipulate your tests on the fly. So if you needed to do something where you wanted to narrow down your testing effort, do a very large-scale test, find failures, and narrow it down over and over again, you can definitely do that with our more DevOps-based API.
Wow, we still have almost 100 people on, so we're going to keep hammering away at the questions and keep hammering away at Matt. Does QuerySurge connect to Informatica, and how do we automate regression suite once workflow jobs are complete?
So QuerySurge itself can connect to pretty much any tool set out there. As we mentioned, we have a full API. Our execution API is included in the base product, and that's command line based, and that can definitely connect to Informatica. We have our DevOps level, which is both command line and a RESTful API. So we can connect to pretty much any tool that can make external calls, whether it's Jenkins, whether it's Informatica, whether it's TFS or Azure DevOps, pretty much anything that you might want. In terms of kicking QuerySurge off automatically, once that job completes, all you would have to do is call our execution API, and that would allow QuerySurge to know that it needs to run a specific test. You can actually tell QuerySurge which test to run and feed those results right back in, similar to how we did with Jenkins.
Great. Does the platform integrate with Azure DevOps for storing and managing test plans and test cases within the Azure boards and user stories?
So QuerySurge itself does link to Azure DevOps and allows you to automatically kick QuerySurge off with Azure DevOps. I do believe we have an integration that is formerly the VSTS TFS one, which is what Eric is opening up right now. And what we recommend customers do is they actually create their test cases inside of Azure DevOps and link those test cases to particular test suites in QuerySurge. And when you run them, it'll automatically kick off a test in QuerySurge and feed those results back. If you scroll down a little bit in here, Eric, I believe we have a step-by-step guide that shows the process of setting up the automation for Azure DevOps. So you can see in here how to set up a particular project, the scripts that might be involved. In this case, it's a unit test. It's very straightforward, and we actually provide a sample of this unit test that you can use. And once this is connected to your particular user story or test case inside of Azure DevOps, whenever you run this particular item, the results actually feed right back in. Very similar to our other test case management systems, we actually feed back results that are formatted for those particular tools. In this case, you can see that we actually have the test coming back as 100% and our pass rate. So each query pair will actually come back as a different number, whether it passed, failed, or other. And then we provide links and attachments to those particular records. That way you can see the actual outcome and get direct links to those results.
We're down to 3 more questions, and they're pretty straightforward. What's the database used by QuerySurge for comparison?
So our backend database is enterprise level. It's MySQL. It's a completely embedded instance of MySQL that is maintained by QuerySurge itself, so you don't have to worry about updates or setting up user accounts and the like. And you also don't have to worry about purchasing it or configuring it. All of that's done by our installer.
Second to last question, do we need separate license to export the query pairs?
So if you want to use our import-export capability, you do need a license for it. It is available in some of our bundled packages. So if you buy certain bundled packages, you will get import-export for free. And all of that information is found on our pricing page. One of the great things about QuerySurge is we do not hide any of our pricing. You don't have to call us up and ask us for, what's the cost of this particular item? What's the benefit of buying X and Y? All of it's found directly on our website. So as Eric is showing you right now, at the top is the pricing option. And you'll see here we have a bunch of different packages that are available. If you open up the subscription deals, what you'll see here is we have a bunch of different packages, and you'll see that as you increase the number of users, the price per user decreases, as well as you get different add-ons available. So our query import export, if you bought a 5-user package, which includes 5 full users and 5 participant, which is our read-only, it would cost about $5,000 extra for that import-export capability. Now, if you went over to our division package, all of that would be included for free.
All right, last question. How do we contact QuerySurge if we need to handle specific data comparisons which are not so straightforward?
So in terms of any questions that you might have, at the top we have a contact us as well as a knowledge base where you can submit any tickets and items that you might have questions on how QuerySurge will work. And our ticketing system is managed by a group of individuals. We try to respond as soon as possible and actually rank tickets based off of priority. These tickets can be covering all of the different functionalities in QuerySurge. If it's something specific to your maybe ETL process where you want to learn how to write SQL or need assistance in writing SQL or some particular use case, which is not a normal technical support item, we do have this concept called premium services, in which case we'll be able to assist you with a wide range of services. So I'll actually help you write that SQL if it's something that is a complex transformation that you're having some issues with.
All right, we're going to wrap up the Q&A session. We hit that with about 30-something questions. Thanks again for your time and participation today. We're going to be sending a follow-up email to you with a link to the recording and our contact information if you have any additional questions. I know some of you had some questions that were specific to your license that you already have. If you do reach out to your account rep or reach out to us on info@QuerySurge.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions we weren't able to get to in this session. Great. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.